Welcome to Shahnameh, Book of Kings. Today we begin with a new chapter, the Reign of Sekandar. Sekandar took his place on the throne and said, King's soul should be imbued with wisdom, since it is God who gives victory in the world, and any king who does not fear him is evil. It is certain that both good and evil will pass, and that there is no escaping the clutches of fate. Whoever comes to my court seeking justice, even if it is against myself, and whether it is during a royal audience or in the middle of the night, will be answered as soon as he speaks. Since he who bestows sovereignty has given me glory, and opened the gates of victory to me, I should collect no taxes from any of my subjects for 5 years, whether they live in the mountains, the plains, by the sea, or in the cities. I will distribute wealth to the poor, and ask for nothing from the wealthy. With this fine speech, Sekandar showed that he was disposed to rule justly, and a cry of homage went up from his palace. Then the crowd dispersed, and the world's ruler sat closeted with his advisers. Sekandar summoned a scribe, who brought a Chinese pen and silk. The scribe dipped his pen in the ink, and Sekandar dictated a letter to Roshanak's mother, Delaray, saying, May God grant you peace, and destroy your enemies. I have already written to you concerning your sorrows. When your husband's good fortune deserted him, and he was murdered by one of his own slaves, I buried him according to the royal rites, and bade him Godspeed from the world. Before we fought, I tried to make peace with him, but his days were numbered, and he refused. Even his enemies felt sorrow when his blood was spilt, and may God conduct him to the blue vault of heaven. None of us can escape the claws of death, which is like the winds of autumn before which we are blown like leaves. The world now waits for your response to Dara's dying wishes, which may witnessed he gave Roshanak to me, saying that she was a suitable bride. Send her quickly to me, accompanied by serving girls, nurses, and Persian noblewomen, so that she may brighten my darkened soul. Keep Esfahan as your own, as it has been in the past, and see that it is looked after by the same wise, experienced, just, and humble administrators who Dara appointed. And if you do not wish to reign there, all of Persia is yours to choose from. Fill your heart with civility toward me, and proclaim me before the world as the new Dara. He sent a similar letter to Roshanak. It began with an invocation to the all-knowing God, who maintained the world, and continued, From royal stock none but noble offspring can come, delightful, wise, and modest, well-spoken, and soft voice. Shortly before he died, taking his glorious name to the grave, your father gave you to me. When you enter my apartments, you will be my chief desire, the first among my women. You will make the crown more splendid, the royal torque and ivory throne more glittering. I have written to your mother, asking her to send you to me in a manner fitting for your station, as a princess, preceded by the chief priest of Esfahan in a splendid litter, and accompanied by your maidservants and women who brought you up. Come to me with peace of mind, knowing you will be the first of my women, and may you always live securely and safely in my royal apartments. When Delaray heard the messenger's words, she heaved a cold sigh from the depth of her being, and wept bitter tears for Dara, who had been hurriedly, ignominiously beneath the dust. Still weeping, she called on her scribe and dictated a shrewd and dignified reply. She began by invoking the world's creator, and then said, It was Dara's glory that I sought from heaven, from which came war and peace and mercy. But since his time has passed, and he has exchanged the throne for a wooden coffin, I wish you well in the world. I wish you greatness, victory, and sovereignty, and that the world's affairs unfold as you desire. And I hide no secret meaning beneath my words. And I have offered you clemency. I have heard your offer of clemency, and may the heavens rejoice in the kindness of your soul. I have heard, too, of the tomb you made for Dara, and the gibbet you made for Mahai and that malignant slave, Janashai. When someone spills a king's blood, he is not long for this world. I knew, too, that you have desired peace and reconciliation, and that you have spent many days with your counselors pondering this matter. But kings do not beg, and no one expects a crowned head to act as a slave. You are now my sovereign, and since the sun has set, you are the moon for us. May the world know only your happiness, and may your name resound forever in its palaces. And it has made our hearts happy that you have thought in this way of Roshanak. She is your handmaid, and we are your slaves, and our heads are bowed awaiting your commands. She sends you greetings, and has written you a letter, an answer as lovely as paradise. The Lord of the world has chosen you, and no one can turn aside from his commands. I have written to my nobles and warlike chieftains, telling them that Dara's sovereignty is now yours, and that no one should disobey you. Then she gave the messenger robes of honor, a purse of gold, and all manners of precious objects. He returned to Sekandar's camp and told the king all he had seen and heard concerning the court's pomp and majesty, which was as splendid as when its former king had reigned there. Sekandar sent for his mother, who was then in Armory, and told her of Dara's dying words. Go to Delaray, he said, and won her over with sweet conversation. See that you meet Roshanak, who lives in Persia there, and convey to her my regards. Take torques, bracelets, and earrings, and a royal throne studded with jewels. Take 100 camels laden with carpets, and 100 more laden with gold-worked brocade. Take 30,000 dinars from my treasury, packed in purses to be scattered before the bride. Take 100,000 Greek serving girls, each one reverently carrying a golden goblet, as it's proper before a princess. Take slaves to look after you along the way, and see that your progress is carried out with royal splendor. The king's mother set out with 10 wise and eloquent translators, and as she approached Esfahan, the nobles of the city came forward in throngs to meet her. Delaray, too, came out from her palace, accompanied by her retinue of courtiers, and so many gold coins were scattered in the courtyard that men thought of silver as so much as dirt. They sat within the palace, the nobles of the court crowded around them, and Delaray brought out such a dowry that it seemed the markets of the world had been emptied for the purpose. For parasangs there was a camel after camel, laden with gold, silver, and colored cloths. There were cloths and carpets, and cloths spread, and cloths to drape, and Arab horses, and golden bridles for Indian swords, and golden scabbards, armor and helmets, and barding for horses, maces and Indian daggers, so much uncut cloth, and so much cloth cut for clothes that no one has ever seen more in all the world. Slaves were summoned from the palace, and 40 golden litters were prepared, her heart filled with happiness. Roshanak took her place in a litter, shaded by a parasol and surrounded by servants. The road was a mass of gold and silver, and horses and escorts. The streets of the city were hung with banners, and there was laughter on everyone's lips, excitement in everyone's heart. They poured coins on the brocade parasol as it passed, and scattered musk in the procession's path. Then, lovely as the moon, the princess dazed. Sekandar's wondering sight, he stared amazed at her as though she were compounded of intelligence and beauty mixed with love. Her stature and her soul bewitching face made his apartments an enchanting place. He sat his mother on a golden throne, then fixed his eyes on Roshanak alone. For 7 days they sat there side by side, Sekandar talking always to his bride, and all his manners showed his sovereignty, his grace and wisdom, charm and modesty. Gifts of gold and silver were distributed throughout Iran, and the whole country, together with the cities of China and Tehran, sent their congratulations. All the world was filled with justice, and the places that had lain waste flourished again. Mehan, the vizier of Cade, the king of Kanagji, counseled his royal master. Sekandar will come here with an army of chieftains chosen from Greece and Persia. If you wish to preserve your status, be wise and do not look for war from him. You have 4 things the like of which no noble or commoner has ever seen in all the world. The first, which gives such luster to your crown, is your daughter, who is lovely as paradise itself. The second is the philosopher you keep hidden, who tells you all the world's secrets. And the third is your physician, who is renowned for his skill. The fourth is the goblet you possess that can never be emptied, whether by fire or the sun or when someone drinks from it. With these 4 things, you can save your position. When Sekandar comes, rely on these, and if you don't want him to stay here a long time, don't think of resistance. You have not the might to withstand his army, wealth, and glory. Now is the age of Sekandar, who is the crown of all nobles. When he comes, give him these 4 things, and I think he will ask for nothing else from you. If you satisfy him in this manner, he will go on his way, because he is wise, and he seeks after knowledge. When Cade had heard Mahon's words, he felt that the ancient days of splendor had been renewed. Having secured Persia, Sekandar led out his army by roads and pathless wastes toward India, and King Cade, as he went forward, the cities opened the gates to welcome him. When his army reached the border city, known locally as Malad, Sekandar, as eager as a lion that scents its prey, summoned a scribe and dictated a letter to Cade. The letter began by praising those who would wash their hearts in wisdom, who chose the ways of ease and looked to enjoy their wealth, who turned to God for aid, placing their hopes and fears in him. It continued, "There are men who know that the throne derives from my power, and that I, Sekandar, am the shadow of the world's victorious Lord. I have written this letter to enlighten your dark soul. When your scribes read it to you, do not put it aside, thinking to deal with it later. If it comes at night, do not wait till dawn. Prepare immediately to obey me. And if you disregard what I say, I shall trample your head, your crown, and the throne beneath my feet." Cade welcomed Sekandar's envoy warmly and said, "I am filled with joy at his commands, and will not turn aside from them for a moment. But before God, it isn't right to hurry things along in this fashion, and for me to go before him with no preparation." He summoned a scribe, who wrote this dictation with an Indian pen on Chinese silk. Noble men will not ignore the king's commands, and we should not hold nothing back from the master of armies, the crown, and the sword. I have 4 things that no one else in all the world has, either openly or in secret, and no one else ever will have possessions like them. If the king commands me, I shall send them to him, and his heart will delight in them. And then, when the king orders me to, I shall come like a slave to pay homage to him." When the messenger told Sekandar what he had heard, and handed over Cade's letter, Sekandar sent him back again to ask what these 4 things were that no one else had. Cade cleared his court and sat with his advisers. They called Sekandar's envoy in and made much of him, and then Cade said to him, "I have a daughter here whose lovely face would make the sun dark if he glimpsed her grace. Her lips still smell of milk, her hair, pitch black, hangs like a woven lariat down her back. The cypress bows before her eloquence, roses are scattered by her eloquence. Her speech exceeds her beauty, all she says seem taught by wisdom, and beyond all praise, and when she chooses to be silent, she becomes the soul of gentle modesty. God-fearing, and a princess chaste and wise, her like has not been seen by human eyes. Then there's the wondrous goblet that is mine, which when it's filled with water or with wine, stays always full. You and your chosen friends could drink 10 years. The liquid never ends. Next, there is my physician, who can tell from 1 drop of urine if you're well. And if not, what is wrong, there's no disease that can escape his cunning expertise. With him at court, you could dismiss all fears of sickness and survive for countless years. And lastly, there's my court's philosopher, who from the turning heavens can infer all that will come to pass, and everything he learns he prompt to pass on to his king." The envoy returned riding his horse as quickly as the wind, and when he told Sekandar what he had heard, the world's conqueror's heart opened like a flower in bloom. He said, "If all he claims is true, the world itself is hardly enough to pay for such things. When he sends these wonders to me, my dark soul will glow with light, and I shall not trample on him as I threatened, but leave his country as his friend." He chose a number of his advisers, all precipitant and knowledgeable men, and sent a letter filled with honorifics and flattery to accompany them. "I am sending of my own trusted savants, all wise and revered men, who will not make any difficulties for you. Let the 4 wonders you mentioned stay where they are. Show them to my envoys, and as soon as I have received a letter from these experienced graybeards saying that they have seen these things with their own eyes, and that the world cannot show their like, I shall write a charter such as your heart would desire, confirming you as the King of India." The 9 Greek advisers made their way from Sekandar to Cade, and the chancellor of Cade's court made them welcome with questions about their journey and had a suitable place set aside for their stay. On the next day, as the sky turned yellow with dawn and the sun drew its sword for battle, Cade's daughter was prepared for her audience, although the full moon needs no adornment. A golden throne was placed within the castle, and the room was decorated in the Chinese fashion. Her face as splendid as the sun, the princess sat on the throne, shining more brilliantly than Venus in the night sky. The 9 sages came in, chattering pleasantries and ready to observe carefully. When they saw the princess's face and the light flashing from her bracelets and throne, they were so astonished that they couldn't move, and their legs felt weak beneath them. The 9 of them stood rooted on the spot, giving thanks to God for such loveliness. None of them could tear his eyes from her, or think how to turn away. They stayed so long that the king sent someone to fetch them, and he said, "What kept you so long?" "She has a lovely face, but she is human, endowed with her beauty by the stars." The sages answered, "No palace contains a portrait as lovely as she is. Each of us will write to our king, saying how incomparably beautiful she is." They then took pen, ink, and paper, and wrote to Sekandar. A messenger took their letters to the king, who was amazed by what he read. Each letter described her in the same fashion. The king's answer congratulated them on having seen the loveliness of paradise, and continued, "There's no need to inquire any further. Return at once, and bring these 4 wonders to me. Assure Cade that his daughter will be looked after well, and set off with this marvel immediately. Cade has treated me justly, and from now on no one will be able to harm him." The messenger made his way back to the 9 sages, who returned to Cade's audience hall. With Sekandar's answer, the Indian king was overjoyed that the threat of an invasion by Sekandar had been lifted. He chose 100 wise, eloquent Indians as an escort, and from his treasury generously selected bracelets, crowns, jewels, uncut cloth, and other suitable gifts, which were then loaded onto 300 camels. Another 100 camels carried silver coins, and 100 more gold. A litter was fashioned from sweet-smelling aloes wood, and hung with cloth of gold, on which jewels were sewn. 10 elephants carried golden hodobs, and the rest of them bore splendid saddles. The princess wept bitter tears of farewell, and set off together with the philosopher and the doctor. A nobleman carried the famous goblet, and the wine in it kept the accompanying courtiers drunk. With this beautiful princess, crowned with her musky hair, as elegant as a cypress topped by the moon, entered the inner apartments of Sekandar's castle. No one there felt worthy to look at her. She wore her hair plaited on the top of her head. Her eyebrows were arched like a bow, her eyes like a paradisal narcissus. She seemed to be fashioned wholly from charm and loveliness. Sekandar took in her stature, her hair, her face, head, and feet, and under his breath he praised God that he had created such beauty, saying, "This is indeed the light of the world." He summoned all the wise men and priests of his entourage, and in their presence he asked for a hand in marriage, according to Christian custom. Then he poured over her so many gold coins from his treasury that it was only the difficulty that she could walk through them. When the lovely Cypress had been taken care of, and a place fitted for her was suitable for her, Seconder turned his attention to the philosopher to see how he would fare in a battle of wits. He sent him a large goblet filled with cow's fat, saying he should rub all his trunk and limbs with it until his fatigue was quite gone, and then he could come and fill Seconder's soul and mind with knowledge. But the philosopher looked at the fat and said, I'm not fooled by his ploy, and he poured 1,000 needles in the goblet and sent it back to the king. Seconder looked at the needles and had the blacksmiths melt them down and made an iron disc from them, which he sent to the philosopher. He, in turn, looked at the disc and rubbed it for a while until it transformed the dark metal into a bright mirror. This was taken to Seconder at night, and kept his own counsel. He placed the mirror outside so that the dew turned it black. Then he sent it back to the philosopher, and so the duel of wits continued. The sage, for his part, polished the metal again, and making it as bright as water, and sent it back to the king. But this time he smeared an unguent on it, so that humidity wouldn't quickly turn it black again. Seconder summoned him and had him seated before the throne. He questioned him, beginning with the goblet of fat, to see if the philosopher had understood what was meant. The sage said to the king, Fat penetrates deeply into the body, and you were saying that your knowledge goes deeper than that of any philosopher. In answer, I said, O king, the hearts of wise men are like needles that can penetrate feet and bones and split stones open. You in turn asked, how can the subtle arguments of a wise man penetrate a heart that's been darkened by feasting, warfare, bloodshed, and constant fighting against enemies? And I replied, my wise soul and heart knows secrets subtler than a hair, but your heart is not darker than iron. You said that in the passing of the years your heart had rusted with spilled blood, and how was it possible for this to be righted, and for you to frame words in such darkness? I answered that I would work on your heart with divine knowledge until it became bright as water and certain of truth. Seconder was delighted by the man's ready answers, and he ordered that his treasurer bring him a set of clothes, gold and silver, and a goblet filled with jewels. But when these were given to the sage, he said, I have a hidden jewel that brings me whatever I wish, and provokes no enemies, and unlike wealth, does not bring Armon in its train. It has no guards to demand a salary from me, and I fear no bandits when I'm traveling. Wisdom, knowledge, and righteousness are what's needed, and going astray from these will lead a man to knock at ruin's door. The Lord of all that is visible and invisible can provide me with sufficient food and clothing. Knowledge is my guardian at night, and wisdom is the crown of my active soul. Why should I rejoice in more than this, and worry about guarding such wealth? Tell your servants to take these things somewhere else, and may wisdom be my soul's guide. Seconder wondered at the sage and thought the matter over. He said, From now on, the Lord of the sun and moon will find no sin in me. I will follow your advice and pay attention to the profitable things you have said. And now I end the telling of my tale for today, but I'll be back tomorrow with more tales, many more tales. Until then, my friends.